Good morning, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. We're delighted to have you here this morning for our webinar on applying phonics to ESOL lessons, the case for phonics and strategies for applying a phonics-based approach to ESOL lessons. So Michelle McGrane from Dublin and Dún Laoghaire ETB will be facilitating. Hi, Michelle.
Good morning, everybody.
So I'll hand you over to Michelle, and hopefully at the end, depending on time, we might have time for a few questions. We'll see how we go. So over to you, Michelle, and all the best.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Fergus, for this opportunity. Thanks to Nala for this opportunity to talk about what is kind of becoming my favorite subject to talk about these days, which is about phonics and how it applies to ESOL and how ESOL tutors might use it or incorporate it into their training. The last time I delivered a program, or the last time I delivered a webinar, I talked quite passionately, and so I went a little bit over the time. So I'm going to try and shorten my presentation a little bit this time, which will hopefully allow for some questions at the end. So if you have questions, you can hold on to them, or you can put them into the chat, I think too. Is that right, Fergus? And we can maybe try and field a few of those at the end. What we're going to talk about this morning, obviously it's about phonics. I suppose we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges, which I'm going to move through very quickly for the simple reason that I suspect that most of you will already be very familiar with the challenges inherent in learning to read and also in learning the English language. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm really talking about the challenges in learning to read the English language. However, it's not necessarily the case that they are all independent of each other, speaking, reading, and so on. I'll talk a little bit about what phonics is and some of the principles underpinning the methodology, some of the skills that are really important for your learners to have if you are using the phonics method of teaching, and how you, an ESOL tutor, or how a program can implement some of these techniques and maybe incorporate them into a program that already exists, or deliver it as a program of, reading and teaching how to read. Okay, so I'm going to state the very obvious to start with. Teaching is hard. Teaching English is particularly hard. And just on that subject, some of the challenges. I will share this slide presentation with Fergus after the session. And for that reason, I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at the challenges, since I genuinely believe that most of you are already familiar with them. Suffice to say that there are challenges both to the teacher, who can sometimes feel sort of a little bit helpless or ill-equipped when it comes to teaching a learner who's maybe having some real difficulty grappling with the basics of reading. Challenges to the learners, not least of which is life itself, because as we all know, adult learners have a whole plethora of challenges to face. But also the actual English language itself and how complex it is. For example, there are 44 sounds, roughly, and 176 spellings in the English language. As an adult, we have sometimes lost the ability to hear certain sounds, which we were able to hear as children, but maybe they became sort of more or less unnecessary because they didn't exist in our language. There's a whole lot of challenges facing an adult learner who's trying to learn how to read the English language. And of course, at an organizational level, there are also challenges, not least of which, of course, is the obvious one, money, but also availability of trained staff, and so on and so forth. Add into the mix then, if you look at things, for example, like there's just a few examples here of why English is hard. If you consider, for example, all of the different spellings for the sound sh, and you will have many students who will proudly tell you, that they will, point to the sh spelling as the spelling for the sound sh, whereas in fact it's only one. If you look at words like action, mission, social, chef, sure, you get the point. Equally, there are lots of different ways to pronounce particular letters. So if you look at the letter O, you have A as in ox, O as in go, as in or, ow, oo, oi, and so on. Equally, there can be many different spellings for one sound. So if you consider the sound A, or if you consider, there are lots of different spellings for the sound A. I think in the workshop, we managed to come up with 11 at the last workshop. So I can't say that was a definitive list, but it was fairly comprehensive. Okay, just a little bit more on why English is a particularly difficult language to grapple with when it comes to reading. And just on that subject, essentially, English is a complex and opaque language. What that means is that there are many different spellings for one sound and many different sounds for one spelling. Compare this to some other languages, which are more what we call transparent, where there is one sound and one spelling. And if you look at the amount of reading, the capacity for reading of a typical student in first grade, that is after 1 year of primary school education, guess which one is at the end here? You won't be surprised when I tell you that it's English. The vast majority of children after 1 year in primary school can read about 35% of the English language, as opposed to a Finnish child learning Finnish, who more or less has reading cracked after 1 year of reading. It's just a harder language for everyone. That's important for your students to understand. A tutor recently mentioned to me in a workshop that there was a time where they were advised not to tell their students that English was a very difficult language to learn, and reading of English was difficult to learn, because it would kind of put them off. I would argue that if I was a student and I was finding it genuinely difficult to learn how to read, and somebody said, well, this actually is quite complex, and explain to them why it's complex, I think I'd feel a little bit better. So I think I might argue that point just a little bit. If we compare a very transparent, and again, by transparent, I mean one sound, one spelling, to the opaque English language.
Yes.
Are we okay? Yeah. Yeah, okay. So if we compare the two, and this is the part that I find a bit heartbreaking, is who struggles the most, okay, after 1 year. And so what we find is that children who are in the highest percentile in terms of IQ and intelligence can keep up. So, if we look at the black one in the first quartile, those kids, it's a little bit more difficult, but they can keep up. If we look at the lowest 25% of children, the children who have the most challenges, and in many cases, those are going to include, sort of the people who've had dyslexia or learning difficulties, but also people who have maybe other social challenges, maybe they have poor attendance, things like that. They are the ones who are absolutely going to fall behind and not able to keep up with the learning of reading. And so consequently, those are the ones who often end up struggling their way through primary school, maybe not even attending very much. Those are the ones that often find their way to us, either in terms of literacy or ESOL. And I have certainly worked with a lot of ESOL students who have told me essentially that they either didn't go to school or had very, very, very little schooling. Okay. If I just talk a little bit about what is called the reading wars, and when I say a little bit, I mean literally 60 seconds. The debate has gone on for the best part of 100 years now about what is the best way to teach them how to read. And that is across the board for all people. So for children, for adults, and so on and so forth. And the battle rages between quite a lot of different approaches. And I suppose I'm not going to go into all of them now, but we could loosely kind of collect them into two groups. One is about learning words, and the focus here is on context and meaning and memorizing words, sight words, whole words. If you learned how to spell when you were young, 10 spellings a night, that kind of thing. Those are all kind of loosely can be gathered into what we can call whole word spellings, or whole word approaches. As opposed to, I suppose, loosely what we would call the phonic approach, which is where we do not teach the learner words, we teach the learner all of the available spellings in the English language, and then we teach them how to look at a word and decode those by figuring out how many of those sounds are represented in the word, and then trying to say those those sounds in the right order. That's a very, very, very brief introduction to the battle. The downside of whole word learning, essentially, is that there are too many words. That's it in a nutshell. So basically, there's roughly 50,000 words in common kind of English discourse. And I have regularly had the experience of students where they have begun learning simple words. In many cases, those simple words would be the words that we have kind of decided are the most useful words. So, you know, practical words like your name, your address, bank, school, exit, entrance, whatever you've decided. There's no real kind of grading at that point. It's just sort of useful words. The main problem is that a student will begin feeling quite optimistic and quite kind of encouraged by this learning. But I have had many students who have recounted to me that there comes a point where they begin to feel, oh, I can't remember them all. I can't take them all in. There's too many. And so they hit a kind of a ceiling. The other problem with the whole word learning approach is that a student doesn't feel in any way equipped to approach a word that they've never seen before. So they don't have a kind of a strategy or a plan for a word that they've never seen before. So basically, they're trying to remember a lot of words. Please do forgive me if you feel I'm oversimplifying, and we are somewhat constrained by time, but that is essentially the downside. The main reason that I have come to like phonics is that it's sequential. So there's an order. You begin, you teach this, then that, then that, then that. It's diagnostic, which means that if you use this approach, you can often pinpoint what has been what the roadblocks have been, what the challenges have been, and maybe why it is that the learner has not actually figured out how to learn before, what has been difficult. If a learner is not progressing, there are reasons, and this diagnostic approach will often help you to identify what they are. It's systematic, so it builds, and every skill that the learner learns can then be applied to the next stage. So at all times they are building skills. So it's a kind of a cumulative effect. They're not wasting time. It's reversible. What I mean by reversible is quite simply that, sorry, I'm just putting in, yes, you will be getting the slides at the end. Okay. So quite simply that you learn how to read and write at the same time. The approach that we use is so interconnected that I was actually slightly confused when somebody asked me at a workshop a while back, are you talking about reading or writing? Because the way I teach and the approach that I was using doesn't differentiate between the two, because you write the word and then you read what you've written and so on and so forth. So you're literally learning how to read and write at the same time. And it's clutter-free and focused. What I mean is it's literally teaching this. It's quite focused and it's progressive. You're moving forward. There's no extraneous knowledge, no extra knowledge, no wasted knowledge. We don't overly focus on sort of tricks or handy little rules. So we don't worry too much about I before E except after C, or the magic E, or things like that, simply because they're just not always true. It's just I is not always before E, after C, and so on, or except after C. Now, I just going to sort of show you this slide and talk about this for a moment, really to try and give you a little bit of insight into what exactly I mean when I'm talking about teaching and using phonics in teaching. So I had a learner who had never been to school before. And at the time, I was writing the word milk on the board. And I felt, and I wrote it in a relatively clear way. So probably the bottom right one there, you know, something like that on the board. And after a few minutes of trying to grapple with the fact that they didn't really speak English, and I tried various pictures and things like that, I realized that the learner thought that I was actually trying to, in some way, reproduce the picture of another. That my writing of the word milk was in some way representative in a pictorial way to what milk might look like, which makes sense if you think about the little drop there and the dot on the I and so on. And I realized at that point, I had one of those light bulb moments, it was quite a few years ago, where I thought, wow, we really have to go right back. Our learners really need us to spell out exactly what we are doing when we're writing these squiggles on the, on the board. So what exactly is it that we need the learner to understand? Number one, when I say a word, and I'm using milk here, the word milk is actually 4 distinct and separate sounds which are coming out of my mouth. M, I, L. I speak them in succession. And when I speak them in succession, I blend them. So I don't say milk. I say milk. That's called blending. Because these sounds are blended, by the way, students are not always aware of the separateness of the sounds. So that's something that will have to be explained or taught. Each one of these sounds has a squiggle, which you can call a letter, a visual representation, a spelling, but we have arbitrarily assigned these squiggles to these sounds as representations of the sound. And we call those spellings. In phonic language, it's called graphemes, and the difference between a spelling and a grapheme is negligible, except to say that a grapheme is not always just one letter. It can be 2 letters, sometimes 3, occasionally 4. The 4 representative symbols, letters, are written from right to left in the order that they are spoken, and they must be written in that order. And in order to read, you need to know what each of those 4 squiggles mean. You need to be able to speak them, and you need to be able to blend them. And that is how you read. That's what reading is. Otherwise known as decoding in the language of phonics. So in order to kind of this is just a really, really brief understanding of what phonics is. Written language is an arbitrary representation in a symbolic code of spoken language. Deep reading involves the ear as well as the eye. You need to learn how to blend in an audio way, aurally, as well as visually. In fact, and I'll talk about synthetic phonics in a minute, synthetic phonics is essentially, there's 2 different types, of analytic and synthetic. Synthetic essentially teaches from the ear to the visual representations. So we learn how to blend by listening first, and then we learn to look at the visual representations, letters, of those sounds. In other words, we go from the sounds to the letters, okay? It's very important. I'm going to mention it again because, first of all, just to say, analytic phonics is quite useful, okay, and quite effective. And the approach that is used, for example, in Jolly Phonics, in primary schools, most primary schools across the country would be largely analytic. Analytic phonics means that we show a visual representation of the sound, and then we learn how to blend those more or less simultaneously, so that they look at the word, break the word up into the sounds, say the sounds, and then blend them. The synthetic phonics is just ever so slightly different because we learn how to blend in an aural way first before looking at the visual representations, the spellings. What I'm going to say is that what I have discovered just through research and through my own personal journeys with my students is that if your student has encountered challenges with reading or is having difficulty in general, which is often the type of student that we end up teaching, certainly at the lower levels of ESOL and literacy classes, that student may very well benefit from a more synthetic approach than an analytic approach. In other words, sounds to letters. I have just personally found that that is quite very much the case. So if you have somebody who has dyslexia or who tells you that they went to school, but they clearly never quite got the reading, there's a good chance that that's the case. And there's research to support that. So that is the reason that I sort of personally prefer synthetic phonics. But phonics, overall is necessary and a good thing. Principles underpinning the phonics methods then is essentially kind of what I just said, more or less in the last while, which is that words are sequences of individual sounds. Sounds are represented by spellings. Spellings can consist of more than one letter. That's the first three principles. And then, as I always say at that point, now here's the bad news. Sounds can be spelled in more than one way. In other words, they can look the same, sound the same, but look different. And spellings can be more than one sound. In other words, the letter might look the same, but sound different. In the vast majority of phonics-based teaching programs, two levels are identified, and we can largely say that the first three principles are the first level, and then the second two principles, which basically look at all the various combinations and variations and permutations of English spelling, is kind of called the second level. There's a lot of different jargon and terminology around this. So some people say simple code, complex code, early code, later code, first level, second level, so on and so forth. Depending on what book you're reading, sounds right, or phonographics. Suffice to say, almost all approaches agree two levels are necessary. So what we do is we teach the first basic level first, which involves teaching the most obvious spelling for each sound. So an example would be that we would teach the letter F for the sound at the first level. And then later we teach the other spelling, so the PH, the GH, and so on. I want to just really kind of ask you to consider that reading is not simply knowledge. And as teachers, you are not simply conveying knowledge. Therefore, an understanding of the principles and an understanding of all the names of the letters and so on is not equal to being good at reading or being able to decode English words. More like swimming. It's a skill. Consequently, it has to be practiced, and you need to be good at the skills. Here are the skills. Phoneme recognition, the ability to identify sounds both visually. So if I look at the word cat, can you show me where is the spelling for the sound a? But also aurally. Again, I want to emphasize this development of the ear exercise, I call it, So basically, if I say to the student, I'm going to say two words now, cat and cut. Can your learner tell me what is the difference between those? What sound is different? Okay, it's the middle sound, and I have changed a to u. If a learner cannot do that, then there's a chance that their ear needs a little bit more exercise, somewhat like the developing of maybe taste buds or musical aural skills, things like that. Ear exercise. The ability to blend. I have to say personally, from my experience, the capacity of some learners to blend, the range is quite broad. So some people can do it so quickly and so obviously that they literally don't really even understand that there's a skill involved. They just seem to be born with it. So I suppose it's a bit like being musically sort of tone deaf or very have a very good ear. But for some people, when you say ah, it's obvious to them that that's ma. However, there's a whole cohort of people when you say ah, and what you'll get back is ah, and you might try many ways. You might go whatever, and it's just not obvious to them, and they often need quite a lot of practicing. If your learner cannot blend, they are always going to have difficulty in reading. It's as simple as that. Blending is an essential skill for reading. The good news is that in my experience, and I've been doing this now for about 20 years, it's a matter of practice and time. So it's not a matter of can this person learn to blend or not. It's a matter of how long is it going to take? How much practice is it going to take? Some take more than others. Segmenting is the opposite of blending. So quite literally, when I say the word man, what sounds came out of my mouth? What came out first? What came next? What came next? Okay. The fourth skill it's called sound switching. And I'm just going to explain that I recommend that people begin practicing sound switching at the very early stages, even though arguably it is not necessary until the slightly later stages. So it's a bit like when you're teaching, well, this is the case with any skill. You often begin sort of teaching the basics of the skill so that they're proficient in the skill before they're even implementing or applying this skill. Sound switching is the ability to quickly take out one sound and try another sound. So, for example, man to min, to men, to mun, to mat, to mac, to mad, just keep changing one sound. It's an absolutely crucial skill when it comes to the point where a learner is reading more advanced words. So, for example, yesterday, we looked at a word with a group that I was working with, table. And we had explored the terrible news, that having spent the first couple of months teaching the sound A for the letter A, I now had to basically tell them that sometimes this letter A is actually a representation for the sound A. So, it can carry both sounds. And so we were looking at different words, and what the learner had to do was try both sounds. So they had to go table, table. And then we talked about, does either of those sound like a word that you know? Okay. And we tried to apply meaning by decoding the various options that were available with the sounds. And that's sound switching. Okay. Before I go on to how exactly you can use this knowledge, or you can implement or apply this knowledge in your ESOL classroom, or in any reading classroom for that matter, I think it might be an idea if we just check in. Does everybody kind of roughly understand? Does anybody have any questions at this point? Would that be okay, Fergus?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I just feel before we go on, we might just sort of check in with that. Is everybody okay so far?
You can give a thumbs up in the chat, or if you have a question, you could unmute and ask, or you could put it in. So really excellent presentation. Great.
All good, thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, we shall proceed.
Positivity
the
coming
reason
through
I
there, Michelle.
Okay, great, fabulous. The reason that I asked whether anybody would like to have a question is because sometimes I have been doing this for quite a while now, and sometimes I kind of assume knowledge, which is not necessarily, the case, that everybody maybe has thought about this or given this as much consideration as I have. And occasionally what happens is somebody asks me a question and I kind of think, oh, I forgot to mention that bit or something. So I always think it's a good idea to give people a minute just in case they want to ask questions. For example, recently somebody asked me, why should I include phonics in my ESOL class? And I said, well, because if you were going to teach, mechanics, it would be assumed that one should teach the names of all the parts of the engine and what they do, and that's literally what phonics is. It's literally teaching the nuts and bolts. There's an excellent question here, which is about phonics with higher levels. Okay, so what I will say is my personal experience is that if a person has managed to make their way to an ESOL level 3, level 4 or above, the odds are they have at the very least the basic of reading and writing. I would actually argue that if they don't have the basics of reading and writing, maybe they shouldn't be in a higher level. So they've at least got the basics. So I tend to come at that particular level with the integrating phonics rather than teaching a sort of a separate independent phonics program, if you like. So what I'm going to do is in the next part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about how you can either teach it independently or incorporate it into your regular class. And I'm hoping when I do that, and I will be looking at 2 different levels, that will answer the question that you've just asked. I'm actually delighted that you asked that question because it means that I'm on the right track. Okay, proceeding along. Okay, so as you can see, I've essentially pointed out here what might be obvious, which is that there are 2 different approaches. And I want to just clarify why we need to consider which approach we're going to take, because essentially it's got to be one or the other. And a number of factors will influence that final decision. Okay, the first approach is a systematic program based on phonics methods. And I recommend this for any person who is essentially starting from scratch. So we are now currently delivering a program in DDLETB, which we are calling ELP. It's ESOL Literacy Provision. And if I can just very quickly give you a little bit of background, as an ESOL tutor myself, I faced the challenges which will not be in any way alien to any of you. You will have all experienced them. So it will be things like having quite large groups, limited amount of time, maybe only 2 hours a week sometimes. I remember having some groups 2 hours a week, maybe 15, 16 people in a group, quite a range of abilities because the students were being assessed in terms of their ability to speak and their language level. But we could have somebody who had 0 English language speaking skills. One person in the class had never gone to school their whole life. So they had no literacy skills, either in their own language or any language. And the other person maybe had a degree in Russian, you know. So this was one of the challenges. In addition to that, we also found that the ability to read and write, or the inability, sorry, that I should say, to read and write was basically proving almost, I won't say a total barrier, but was certainly slowing down the process of ESOL in the regular classes. So I felt a little bit frustrated, ill-equipped, like a lot of tutors, felt that I couldn't really find a way to move these people on. Very frustratingly, I am aware of situations where students tutors attended ESOL classes, maybe for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but they just weren't progressing because they didn't know how to read and write. For those learners, what we really did was develop an ESOL program, which is based on phonics. So what we did was we developed, for example, very basic CVC worksheets. So for example, the learner in a class like this will learn how to spell the word man, before they learn how to spell the word toilet. They will learn how to spell the word hat, hat, before they learn how to spell, let's say, jacket. Okay, so the words are organized according to their phonic complexity rather than the urgency with which they need them in terms of, utilization and function in the real world. However, the program is designed that they have the basics of the English language or of reading of the phonics within a year. So the idea is it's quite intensive. It's sort of based on the old Itabi's model. So they're getting 6 hours a week. They're getting 3 classes of 2 hours. So they're moving forward quite quickly. And what we're hoping to achieve is that they have sufficient reading. We won't say that they're brilliant readers, but they have sufficient reading then to be able to enter, if you like, a regular ESOL class. So basically what they are getting is a phonics grounding before they move on to a conventional ESOL class, a traditional ESOL class, which would have a combination of not only reading and writing, of course, but also speaking and listening skills, the whole language thing. Okay, so that is kind of one approach that we have decided to take to address the needs of people who have almost or near 0 literacy. The second approach is for people who either have some reading and writing skills, or for people who are in a class where simply the luxury is not available to devote the entire class to a phonics lesson. Okay. And, you know, where you're essentially wanting to teach some phonics, but you're also including lots of other elements of language. All right. So both of those options are available, and both of those options are possible. And that should certainly be discussed with, you know, an ALO or with the tutor has to make that decision before they start. Sometimes it's possible to do a combination of both, depending on the situation. I want to just show you one or two very, very simple examples of what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to share. This is really just to kind of, I suppose, illustrate what I mean. So if I just show you, this is a typical worksheet from the phonics-based program. Are you getting that share, Fergus? Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a very basic phonics-based worksheet for an ESOL class. As you can see, the words are what we call CVC. That is consonant, vowel, consonant. However, there is a small bit of grammar included. We have A for single, we have S for plural, and then we move on to, surprisingly, quite a lot of animals have CVC words. We continue on like this. We then move to what we call a CVCC. So you can see that the words are increasing in their phonics complexity. Okay. Now, arguably, you might say, well, do we need to teach the word frog before we teach the word hand? Is that really necessary? And this is where the argument comes in. But this program is designed to teach the fundamentals of reading and writing before we move on to speaking and listening. And to be clear, the reason that we developed that was because we found that learners who had zero literacy were actually completely hindered, and ESOL tutors were finding that they just, you know, kind of weren't able to progress with them. So a little bit of basics. Now I'm just going to show you then by way of comparison, something that I do with learners who are already ESOL learners. And this is the other approach, the second approach, which is essentially, how will I say, applying some phonics to what you're already doing, you know? Okay, so I want to show you, this is a page, and again, this is just an example. I have sort of hundreds of these, from an excellent NALA resource. Sorry, now just bear with me while I get my sharing right. Okay, so it's from the big picture. I think it's the big picture 2, as far as I remember. And this is a lesson about going to the library. It's all about applying for the library, a conversation that happens at the library, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's quite possible that as an ESOL tutor, that would be part of a lesson. Very common. Okay, now what I've done is I've gone to the script. Okay, there's the particular script there, the transcript of the audio. Okay, and what I've done is I've analyzed that script phonically. Okay, so I'm just going to show you now the phonic analysis of it. Now, do not be daunted by what would appear to be somewhat, oh, how shall I put this? It looks a bit complicated when you look at it first. Okay, but, you know, just bear with me for a second. Okay, so text analysis, here we go. Okay, so I'm now sharing this. Apologies now while I do the sharing. Sorry, guys. I hope I'm not being too, okay. And this will address the answer to the question of the lady who said, what about the higher levels? Okay, so in my case, I prepared this for a lesson that I was working with. Okay, so I took the words. Let's look at the word librarian. Okay, and I point out to the students that this, although it is almost always a spelling for the sound I, it is occasionally a spelling for the sound I. So here, for example, this is not librarian, but librarian. Now, that is something that we had actually covered before in a previous lesson. So I have listed that under seen before, okay? What the learners may not have been aware of is that sometimes when a vowel is followed by the or, you get a slightly different sound, R, Okay, please excuse my pronunciation, very Irish pronunciation. If we had a person from London here, I know they do a better job, but we practice then with other words like star and far. Okay. Now, moving down, here are some other sounds that the students had seen before. I keep a little record. So this is oo, this is e, and I will simply say to the learners, we've seen this one before. You've seen this as a spelling for e. Can anybody tell me any other words? And I'm hoping that they'll remember. Okay. We will look at the double L. We may not have looked at that before as a spelling for the sound oo. So we look at words like that. Okay. A useful one, and I just want to point at this one because this is quite a common one, is this as a spelling for the sound z. Okay, so I will say to my learners, usually you guys all know that this is a spelling for the sound s. Okay, however, sometimes it's a spelling for the sound z. And then we look at, okay, so we have excuse, and then we look at some other words that also have this as a spelling for the sound z, like has, his, plays, does, and so on. Okay, okay. Equally, we look at this as a spelling for the sound ah, explaining that usually, I use the word usually quite a lot, it's a spelling for the sound ah, but sometimes it's a spelling for the sound ah. Okay, so that is how I kind of conduct a little analysis. I've done this one out in quite a lot of detail in order to allow you to see how I kind of analyze it. Truthfully, sometimes I kind of do it more in my head, you know, depending on the day and how much time I've had. Okay, so for example, here's another one, this as a spelling for the sound E, and that's that they have seen that before. Another thing that I will need to point out before we begin this is the concept of acronyms and abbreviations, because they actually come up in this particular dialogue. So I need to explain that to the learners beforehand. So I've just noted that there to remind myself, you know, ESB, we might have to talk about what an acronym is, what an abbreviation is. Okay. And the way I conduct this lesson is saying, you guys remember this before. So what sounds, can anybody remember sounds with this as, the, you know, this spelling for I? And, you know, learners might say something like wind. And I would say, okay, let's listen to that. Wind. That's more of an I, you know, we talk about that. And then equally, I've just written down some examples here to remind myself. Because I kind of do this quite a lot, I've got into the habit of recording which sounds we've already done. You know, but you don't have to do that. And then these are the ones that I want to introduce today. So it's this S as the sound Z. I want to introduce as well that this is sometimes with the E. I want to introduce the W or for the R. And I also want to introduce this one as a spelling for the ah sound. Okay, so these are the ones that I'm planning. These 4 sounds are the new ones, which they may not have encountered before, and which I plan to clarify and practice today in my lesson. Now, I maintain that the introduction of those sounds and talking about them could be done, arguably you could spend a whole lesson at it, but could also be done 20 to 30 minutes time, could be spent on that as an integrated part of the overall ESOL lesson, where you're doing the lesson on the library card and joining the library and filling out application forms and so on. So that is what I mean when I talk about integrating the phonics into the ESOL. Okay. All right.
Michelle,
Now,
we have a question or two. Do you want to take them now or
yes.
at the end?
Now, I've essentially thrown quite a lot. I'm more or less finished. I've essentially thrown quite a lot of information at you there. Okay. I wish I had like time to go into all of these in tremendous detail, but I'm hoping that you're at least getting a taste of what I'm talking about. So maybe this, yeah, let's do the questions now, Fergus. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Ashleen's asking, in my TEFL days, we use symbols to represent the sound. Phonic symbols, we call them. They're found in English dictionaries. Do you see any place for that in ESOL? And then she has excellent presentation.
Thank you. Now that's come up a couple of times recently. So here's what I'm going to say about that. First of all, there are 2 things about that. First of all, I never use them with the learners who are not already familiar with a language, at least one language, if not English, at least very literate in some language. Okay, so I work with quite a lot of learners who don't have literacy in any language. Consequently, I can't. I just feel that those phonic symbols are just another language to learn. It's just another set of symbols. They're already learning the first symbol. So in that case, no. The second thing I'm going to say is if a learner is already proficient with those particular symbols, you may find them useful in an ESOL class, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But what I have found is that given our limited time and given the range of students that we work with, it is highly unlikely, not impossible, but highly unlikely that you will find a group of learners who are all proficient with those phonetic symbols these days in an ESOL class. Therefore, it is additional learning. And given the amount of, if you think about it, those symbols were developed at a time of dictionaries, hard copy dictionaries, before any other resources were available. So how could the dictionary tell you how to pronounce it? Well, we needed that set of symbols. But nowadays we've got Google. We can just play the sound. We've got, like there's so many videos. Why would you need those symbols when you can just go, there are apps which have people playing those sounds, saying those sounds, pronouncing those words. So I would argue it's not that there's anything wrong with them, so much as that there are easier and more readily available resources now. And many of the students don't have those. So I kind of tend to say, well, I'm just not going to go down the road of teaching them if they don't already have them. But if you have a group and they love them and they all want to use them, there's nothing wrong with that. But in my experience, that's quite a rare event these days.
Thanks, Michelle. One or two people are asking that sheet you showed there. Are you going to send that to me for me to send on to the? Great,
yes,
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to email me individually, I've done quite a few analyses of quite a few pieces. And possibly that's something for another workshop, maybe how to analyze a piece. But I have some more analysis of some other pieces. It's the kind of thing that the first time you do it, you go, oh, that looks really complicated. But actually it sort of starts to become a bit obvious after a while. But certainly, yes, absolutely delighted to share that with you, Fergus, and anybody else.
Thanks. And Michelle, there's a question from Niall here saying, what do you say to a student who asks you why the letter I is pronounced differently in find and wind?
I say, because English is crazy. And then I go, I know. I am not here to defend the English language or apologize for it. I am only here. Look, it is a crazy and ridiculous language. I will tell you a little story. I had a student recently who we were moving on to the later code, and I was teaching her all the spellings for the sound A. We started with 5 spellings. And she just looked at, and she just kind of said, and she doesn't have a lot of English, but I knew exactly what she just went, Michelle, why why? And I knew what you wanted to say is, why are so many different spellings for the same letter? Why is that the case? And I just said, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It's crazy. And, I tried to explain in my sort of pidgin English, well, there were people and they started, and then there was other people and they had a different way, and then they mixed them together, and then more people came, they all came along, and the language developed. I was trying to give her this sort of like literally history of the English language and how it developed. And she just went, oh, and she just went, it is a very bad plan, And I was like, I absolutely agree. I was like, yes, it is. And then she just went, and I thought it was quite insightful. She just went, I suppose it is too late, And what she was really saying was, it's too late to change now. So the reality is, we are stuck with this ultra complex kind of illogical language. And unfortunately, it's universally used. I mean, if anything, it's growing in use. So kind of we're stuck with it is the answer to the question.
If Finland invades the world, we could all learn Finnish.
It's so much easier.
Yeah.
Portuguese is pretty good too.
Okay. There's another question saying this, talking about the sheets you showed and the breakdown, this seems a really useful approach to take in class when dealing with frequent pronunciation errors alongside drilling.
What I can offer to you and what might be useful is lists of spellings, so all of the spellings for the A, all of the spellings for the sound D. However, I suppose a little bit more time than we have here today would be required to kind of maybe, fully understand how to analyze. But like anything, we need to understand it before we teach it. But would it be possible send on your text to an analysis sheet? I mean, I can certainly send the analysis sheet and examples of it, and I can certainly send the lists, of the various phonic sounds, if that would be helpful.
I think they're giving
I've
a
also,
thumbs up. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Anything else that I could send to help, or anything
Anyone
else?
just want to unmute and ask Michelle something, or send something on?
I'm laughing at myself because in my enthusiasm to finish a little bit earlier today, and because the last time I talked for so long that we ran out of time, I think I might have actually finished a little. I spoke a little bit too fast today. It's hard to get it exactly right.
No, everyone on all the webinars you do for us say that you're an excellent presenter and the queen of
Great.
phonics and the queen of plain English, because you explain things really clearly. I don't know if you're
Yes.
interested in plain English, but you definitely deliver in plain English.
Yes, well, I suppose that comes from sort of 20 odd years of working with people who I suppose have relatively limited English skills. And so, I've kind of learned to also, I suppose everything that I'm kind of working on and everything that I've developed, and I've seen this time and again, and maybe this is why I'm so passionate, has come from my own efforts to try to address the needs of learners who are coming week after week after week. I had an experience there a few years back where a learner walked in the door and sat down, picked up her pencil, ready to write down everything that I said. She was going to copy every single thing I said. And she did not know how to decode the word cat. Like when I put the word cat in front of her, she had no idea how to read that. And the tragic thing was, I went back onto PLSS and looked. She had been attending classes for quite some years, but she had no basic, and that had really held her up, you know. And what I have found is I've been working with her now. We're into her second year now. And she now will do, what she will do is when she comes across a word that she doesn't know, it's not the end of the story for her. She'll go, wait, 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 wait. And she'll go, okay, so what we have done is we have equipped her with a strategy so that she doesn't just look at the word and go, I'm waiting for you to tell me what this word is. She goes, hang on, I can figure this out. And I think that is super important. I think it's empowering. I think it's practical. So that's why I get so excited about it, because I see the implementation of it every day.
Well, Michelle, there's very, very, very positive comments coming through. Roisin Mullen saying, it only clicked recently when speaking with a primary school teacher friend how phonics is much more important for TESOL than alphabet. Okay.
Unfortunately, the English alphabet is very different to how we actually apply. Like it's largely in many regards, it's not very helpful at all. Consider the letter H. Like we never say H. It's always going to be huh. Why we call it H. It's not really very helpful to know that information. It's just not that helpful. It's much easier to know that that's actually a representation of the sound huh. That's a useful piece of information. Um,
Michelle,
we're always willing to talk. Anyone who's saying that they'd like to talk more, please contact me. I will talk about this till the cows come home. Love it.
And somebody's asking, pointing out that is more that phonics is much more important than the alphabet. Would you use Twinkle for resources? Do you know what that is?
I do know Twinkle. So basically, one of my kind of big goals in life is to try and find adult appropriate materials. And as we all know, anybody who's been down this road knows that there's such a range, there's myriad children appropriate materials, so much. And so I will use any materials which are appropriate to adults. So I avoid any materials that have little kind of pictures of unicorns or smiley faces or things like that. And the materials that I am currently creating have actual photographs. And, things like Ted is a dad, and we have Ted holding his baby rather than, maybe something that's a bit more childish, So we try. So my thing is I will use any materials that are appropriate. I've recently discovered that some websites will actually sell you the materials without the pictures and logos, but you have to pay a bit more, which I think is quite cheeky. But you can actually buy, there are some websites which I use, which are designed for children. And if you subscribe at a different rate, they will actually give you the materials without the grade and the pictures on it. So it's always worth investigating how you can kind of make it a bit more. So that's the answer to that. I'll use anything that is not going to be inappropriate for an adult.
Okay, Helen says, I just finished learning the IPA for a Celtic course and was struggling to implement, and I'm delighted to see your method before I get too bogged down. Great presentation. Thanks, Helen.
Okay. I'm happy for you to share my email,
yeah.
just to say that to you, Fergus.
Okay, when you send me the stuff, Michelle, and I send it out to everyone in the CC, I'll put Michelle's email address. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So that if anyone
would it be
further
appropriate as well for me to share? I have a number of YouTube videos which I've been sharing with other people. They are not mine. I have not developed them in any way. I've just discovered them. But it is a teacher sitting with a student, and she demonstrates blending, segmenting, and I just think they're quite insightful. So I will also send those links to you, Fergus.
Definitely, and I'll send them on. People would be delighted with that. Thanks a million.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic.
Okay, well, it just leaves to me to say once again, a huge thank you to Michelle. You're so clear, so informative. I've been in on about 4 or 5 of your webinars now, Michelle, and they're great. I love them. And everybody who attends always is very, very positive. So you're just great at explaining things, and you make things so clear. So thanks very much, Michelle, and thanks everyone for
it's a fantastic opportunity for me. This is something that I've been working on for many, many years. And, I feel a little bit like kind of John the Baptist shouting out in the desert for a long time, that now people are kind of listening and they're interested. It's just wonderful for me. I'm just so appreciative to have the opportunity to share kind of, I suppose, my experience and what I'm learning. That's what it's all about. We're all sharing what we're learning as we go along, aren't we?
Right. Yeah,
absolutely.
Michelle, thanks a million, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We've got 2 more webinars on tomorrow, Thursday at 1 o'clock. We've got Taking Away the Fear of Technology. Finborough Shea from Tipperary's chair is facilitating, and then on Friday at 12 o'clock we've got Creating Classroom Resources Using ChatGPT. So Scott Wilson is facilitating that. So thanks, Michelle. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye-bye.